Welcome, everybody. Okay, Aiko, you can wait just almost. Wait a second. Yeah, now you can do it.
Okay. Then.
Okay. And we'll do it. All right. So this is from an article that Bob sent me. Hold on here. We just got to see if we can get our screen projected. There we go. We almost got it here. Boom. All right. So you're not plugged in.
Plugged in. Oh, it came out at this end. Shoot.
Oh, shit. Okay. So Bob sent this article, interesting article, and we're still having problems here. Somebody just came in. Ray's come in. I go play with this. I don't know what the problem is there, but it's HDMI 1.
How do I get rid of it?
Yeah, I don't know. It's not working. There we go. Okay. So the studio's rolling here. This is the bottom of Lake Kauhila. We talked about that last week. And the interesting thing that Bob suggested in the article he sent me was that this dried up lake bed may be acting like a shock absorber for earthquakes, because the next earthquake is overdue by about 300 years. Do I have that right, Bob?
You have it right only insofar as if that's what's in the New Scientist article, and if that's real science, then you have it right.
Can we go back a slide? Oh, you're there.
Yeah.
Lake's disappearance could explain why there have been no quakes for 300 years. So 1906 doesn't count.
Well, that's an interesting thing. Bob, take it away.
I sent you a short article from the New Scientist, which I'm not even sure is actually real science these days. It may well be. I guess they were suggesting there have been no such quakes in that area way down in the south of California. But okay. a good question. It reminds me of the comment by a politician recently blaming someone, maybe Biden, for the terrorist attacks on the United States, because there have been no terrorist attacks, it was claimed, under Republican administrations. I think they got a short memory. Sorry about this. It's not, I forget the politics. Yes, no earthquakes down in the south. For 300.
Well, Northridge 89, that was a pretty big one. That was in the south.
I would draw. I am no longer going to be forwarding articles from the New Scientist.
No, but let's just keep that in mind. Maybe we don't have the exact earthquake, but it's amazing the superficial things that can touch off earthquakes, like fracking apparently is creating.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, okay, onward and forward. Now this is Homer also contributed an article this week, and this was very personal for Aiko and I. Our son Jeremy was freelancing all around in 2020, going from one protest and one violent episode to another all around the country. And he spent some time up in Portland, but even in L.A., he had noticed that the violence around Black Lives Matter wasn't being caused by blacks; it was being caused by whites. He noticed that very, very early in May, a few weeks after George Floyd was murdered. And so he started pursuing that, so much so that he ran down the source for the anarchist ideology, which was in Minnesota in America, but it had come from Germany in the 1980s. So he did his due diligence and started calling out the anarchists, and they attacked him on social media, which is why we're glad that he's in Hawaii now, and I'll get to that in just a second. Thanks, Homer, for sending that. I just took a few paragraphs from the article. Tom Hartman, he has a Substack column. He also has a radio show. A very interesting background, but currently you could call a liberal. And so he talks about chaos agents and where the genesis of that came from, and that it was part of a big part of the violence that rippled through our politics in 2020. And it's this black bloc version of anarchism. And up in Portland, they firebombed the federal building repeatedly. Homer and I have good friends that live up there, two of our classmates from medical school. And of course, Fox News made hay out of that. But it also happened in Seattle and various cities around the country that took Jeremy all around the country, and finally on January 6th into the Capitol, our intrepid son, the reporter. But Hartman says that the black protesters tried unsuccessfully to separate themselves from mostly white boy vandals who concealed themselves most of the time. And Jeremy went into all the different ways that they dressed and the secret insignias and things like that. I guess the right had the Umbrella Man and Rittenhouse. But it was on our left, this group of people were exploiting Black Lives Matter, and they are not participants in our democracy. And Jeremy had a hard time getting his message out to the mainstream. Finally, a New York Times op-ed page editor reached out to him, and so he had his 15 minutes. And then this whole point of view was endorsed finally by Oregon Public Broadcasting. The same type of headline. So I mentioned Jeremy landed in Hawaii, and after a couple of years in Oahu, he managed to get himself named as the bureau manager of two islands, the Big Island and Maui. And so he's been right in the midst of it. But here's the thing. So was Homer's family. His son Jeffrey and his family was in Lahaina, close to the day of the tragedies, and they were staying at a condo not that far away, and he had his own story to tell. I don't know if Homer wants to share that, but Jeremy has been reporting there, and he got himself attached to the governor's caravan. And when the governor's caravan was returning from the area of fire, Jeremy peeled off and headed in a direction he was not supposed to go to report on the communities that were cut off north of Lahaina. And that's kind of where he's been. He's going back for a month, and we are glad he wasn't there when the day that the fires broke out, but he was there a few hours afterwards, and it's going to be there for quite a while. And so he was on the CNN World News. That's his 15 minutes of fame in journalism. All right. I don't know. Did anybody want to comment? Homer, Jenny, if you're there.
John, the only thing I would say is that right now the San Francisco Mime Troupe is putting on their annual fall, and it is all about homelessness and Fox News, and to a certain extent the reporting that's being done. And the play is, I believe, in Mill Valley, and then we'll be in San Francisco at Dolores Park, and I highly recommend it. Yeah,
we've been to them in the past. It's a lot of fun. It's an event, right? It's an
event,
outside picnic,
political theater at its best.
Yes, absolutely. Aiko.
I asked Jeremy yesterday on the telephone.
He's done the part about Maui.
Oh shoot, what are we doing now?
You hear me?
Well, now we're on to
Yeah.
How could he tell that it was the anarchists creating all the problems? And he said, well, I just went there and I looked and I could see them doing it. And I thought, yeah, right. You would go right in there. The rest of us would turn around and leave as soon as we can.
That's Jeremy. All right. So, and you'll keep time for me.
Yeah.
The Economist has been on the China story since May, and all of a sudden, their cover portrays that, maybe China is not going to just keep going up, up, and up. Maybe they've leveled off. Maybe they've reached their peak. And now, in the last month, there's some questions about whether they're going backward. So last week, we talked a little bit about China's disillusioned youth. And it's fitting that the person that's leaving is a woman. More about that in just a second. But in particular with women, a lot of women in East Asia, not just China, are walking away from the traditional family. And that's because Confucianism, as orderly as it has been, does not have an exalted place for women. And you'll know that when the one-child policy was in force, families would go out of their way using sonography to make sure that the one child they'd have would be a male. So there's a shortage of females, a missing generation of females when the one-child policy was in effect. And today they're protesting, and they're doing family planning. They're not getting married. There's a lot of single parents. There's a lot of women who would prefer they want to have a kid, but they prefer to do it alone. Thank you very much. The Chinese government initially resisted this, but now they're getting desperate because of the falling population. They're way below replacement value, and they're losing population. So this kind of reminded me of the Greek play where the women go on strike. Specifically, they refuse to have sex with the men until they stop going to war and fighting so much. In East Asia's case, I think it's the men working and coming home late and ignoring the family. China's youth is in bad shape. They're having a bad moment. And Xi Jinping is not sympathetic. Why? Because when Xi Jinping was young, it was during the Cultural Revolution. And he was the son of a prominent revolutionary communist. He's what's called a princeling. Well, the princelings tried to ease Mao out, and Mao struck back with the Cultural Revolution. And so princelings were targets. He was a target of the radicals in the Cultural Revolution, and was sent down to a farm village. He escaped and then was sent down again, and he finally came to terms with it. So he's not sympathetic, and he wants Chinese youth to toughen up. And the problem is, specifically with COVID, when all of a sudden the job situation cooled down, you have unemployment that gets worse with each passing year, and so it hasn't even peaked yet for 22-year-olds that are entering the job market, 20%, above 20%. And it's so bad that the government has stopped printing the statistics. So how high this goes, we won't know, because they're not going to tell us. Yes, Bob.
Well, I'm looking at the foot of the chart. This is unemployment rate for 16 to 24-year-olds.
Yeah.
And if I were a skeptic, and I like The Economist, but this chart is simply telling me that at the age group that people are in high school and at university, that there's large unemployment. So I wonder what this means.
Well, it's a good point. It may not be precise. I don't know what all these other cohorts represent, but it is something that's being experienced. And in the economic sector, it's real, and there is a lack of enthusiasm and ambition.
Well, John, it's the different lines aren't representing different cohorts. They represent the same cohort, 16 to 24-year-olds, year by year. And what this graph shows very clearly is the proportion who are unemployed of that cohort has increased year by year from 2018 up to the top 2023. Why it peaks in June, July, I don't know. But what's very clear is that more people in this age group are unemployed now than were 5 years ago.
I think
A
it's
lot more.
in June, July, because that's when there's graduation and classes enter the workforce. Well, good. It's good to have a true scientist in our group that knows how to see these things more precisely and studies it. I kind of, when I'm preparing my slides, run and grab, especially in the last few days. So thank you. And that's why I enjoyed doing this. So I can learn as well. Yes, Shigeko.
In the LA Times, Jonah Goldberg wrote down, Chinese economic statistics have never been entirely reliable, but the last reported number for urban youth unemployment we have is 21.3%. It may actually be closer to 50%.
Yeah, and China is a black box. We're not sure of their data, and in some ways, it's a little bit like Argentina. And when they stopped, Argentina stopped reporting on their statistics. It didn't matter because people had stopped believing it. So. Yeah, well, something to keep. It is a problem. The magnitude precisely, we don't know, but it seems that we can say it seems to be getting worse, as Homer points out. So housing is a big part of this story. So earlier on, getting a house was impossible, especially in the cities. And of course, we've had that problem in San Francisco and the Bay Area until quite recently. And so that's been a little dispiriting for our kids. So it's no wonder with increased urbanization the Chinese are being affected as well. The other problem with the single child part is that there were some children who had 4 grandparents, 4 to 1. And so you had 4 grandparents fighting over the intention of one child. So you might think some of those are spoiled, but now they're being called upon increasingly, and will be even more in the future, to figure out a way to take care of their 4 grandparents. And so that line was just crossed, where the number of people older than 40 was greater than the young, between 0 and 14. So and the other problem, and I keep pointing this out, we rely on immigrants to bail us out of a lot of problems, but China is just not that open to other cultures and immigrants. It just isn't. And if China wants to lead the world, that's a huge handicap. And it's not. It just takes away a bumper, a guardrail, if you will, from problems. So in this country, we have a lot of Filipino nurses for sure, and maybe they'll resort to that with time. So the evidence for the actual mood is this study of tweets by when people were born. And for some reason, the people that were born in the 1990s, so they're up to age 32 at this point, they're the most dispirited of all. They've grown up and their whole life has been with progress and upward striving, and now all of a sudden it's not completely up. It's interesting that the younger and the older generations are a little more upbeat. But these are the people who, in an economy, people reaching their 30s are expected to start a family and to start buying stuff and houses and cars, and they're not doing it. So why? You've got some basic demographic problems, but you also have an autocracy that's making bad decisions. So, I mean, in terms of the competition between autocracy and democracy, that's one reason I'm kind of casting today in a more optimistic frame than I usually do. And it's not schadenfreude. I just want to spell out what's going on in China. Because in reality, the worse they do, the worse the whole world's going to do, right? They've saved our bacon a lot of times. They've obviously increased our standard of living with their cheap manufacturing. And during our 2008 crisis, they spent a lot of money. So they were doing the Keynesian stimulus thing on the other side of the globe that kind of bailed the world out. But now that the role is reversed, and a part of the problem is their policy on COVID, and especially they did not get their older people vaccinated when the Omicron variant emerged, which is much more communicable. They could handle the earlier variants, but they couldn't handle Omicron, and so they didn't use the zero COVID time to vaccinate enough people, and we've talked about how that exacerbated the employment of youth. And the other problem, of course, is the legacy of a previous generation of autocrats, the one-child policy, that you have aging workers, and older people don't spend as much as people in their 30s, for instance. So this is this week's Economist. Here you've had a downbeat cover story on China 2 weeks in a row to add to the others that have accumulated since May, this report I just spotted today. We can't trust China's reporting on COVID. We can't trust our reporting on COVID. We can't trust anybody's report. So we're forced to resort to concrete things like the rate of hospitalization. You're either hospitalized or you're not, and the death rate. That's binary. You're either alive or you're dead. And the death statistics are relatively reliable. One smart journalist spotted the consumption of cremation urns in one part of the country, and they saw a jump of 60%. And so there, every once in a while, you get a glimpse of what's really going on. But this thing that came out today, just in the first 2 months of opening up, there are close to 2 million excess deaths. excess deaths, where you look at the number of people who died in the last 5 years, correct it for the change in the baseline population. And the Economist has done that for every country around the world, and that's how they've come up with their worldwide statistics. Something like 16 million probably excess deaths globally. I think we had something a little over 1 million in our country, which is COVID plus unexplained deaths. And some of the unexplained deaths may not have been directly from COVID. They might have been to the inability to get regular medical care. But this is the inside of a Shanghai hospital right after they opened up. And it was the sort of thing that we saw in northern Italy at the very beginning. It's the sort of thing that we saw in Queens and in New York, where all of a sudden an older population is exposed. So they talk now about the overall picture duplicating what happened in Japan. Japan has spent a couple of decades in deflation, but in China, in addition to the deflation and the demographic decline that they had in Japan, there's also a lot of debt, both private and public debt. And what that means is, if you have deflation and the prices are going down, the value of money is being deflated, you have to pay off your debt with more valuable money to you, more valuable before it got deflated. So that compounds the problem of debt. So the three Ds. And then when they opened up after COVID and suspended zero COVID, they thought, okay, now we're going to have the economy bounce back. There's going to be revenge spending, and it did go up for a while. But it started going down again. The other part of the economy is the decrease in the labor force. It started going down maybe 5-6 years ago, but it's projected to plunge. So they've got a lot of problems coming up. And the other thing China has to worry about, in addition to their deflation and their aging population, is that we're not buying as much stuff from them. And in fact, we're trying to be, for security reasons, trying to thwart some of their development of technology. So demand for their products is way down. And this is worse for China than it was for Japan, because Japan was able to climb and get their lifestyle within 60% of America's before they faced this crunch. China's only at 20% of our living standard. So to stop now is going to be a harder pill for them to swallow, 3 times harder than it was for Japan. The other problem, and this gets to the problem of autocracy, is you have centralized power. And this is one of the arguments that I have made, and I've found new evidence to support. Centralizing a power is not a good idea for a large variety of reasons. Deng Xiaoping realized that, and he urged pragmatism for a long time, decentralization. I've made this point with deflation, you have to pay your debts with more precious money. But there's always stimulus, but she has a ideological beef about stimulus, and which he calls welfarism, which he thinks is an example of Western decadence. And he's not even willing to cut interest rates, which is classically what you're supposed to do when your economy's deflating. Xi's beef is growth has to be high quality, which means in the service of competing with the West. And so he won't approve any resources going to industries that aren't promoting China's nationalist ambitions to match his swagger, which is exactly the opposite of what Deng recommended. Hide your capacities, bide your time. Until we grow within 60% of American living standards. Well, Xi Jinping didn't want to wait for that and has taken action. And he's very suspicious about successful entrepreneurs and capitalists. Think Bernie Sanders. And he called his regulators out to bring these entrepreneurs back under control. Their Elon Musk had to be taught a lesson. The Communist Party's more powerful. So their Elon Musk was Jack Ma, and he wound up going into exile in Japan for a while. And now entrepreneurs are obviously not enthusiastic about investing in China anymore. And what's she doing about it? He stopped publishing the bad news, right? And so there's all this fake optimism, and it's not going well. The citizens are reading through it. One netizen was quoted as saying, "I saw on TV that I should stop smoking, so I stopped watching TV." She is saying the real economy is what is going to get us the vital technology that we need, and so we can just keep growing. So there was a downturn in COVID, just like there was everywhere. But when they came out of COVID, buying consumer revenge was supposed to shoot them up, but instead it's continued to go down. And he's actually made it worse by reining in some consumer-driven products, which he calls disorderly, which basically were, he said, okay, no more special education. If you are trying to get your kids to pass the exams, you can't hire tutors. You can't specifically put them in cram schools like we see in Japan, and we see in especially South Korea. When Aiko and I were in Seoul, the school's out and all the kids head to cram school. And now this might be something we'd agree with. He's limiting video games, and the Chinese Communist Party can do that. They can reach into the homes, and it's imprecise, but they can set the tone. And I forget how many hours a week it is, but there's a specific number of hours a week that kids should be allowed on their computers. And now that they've intervened, even if they realize they've made a mistake and they've been too aggressive and invasive in the private sector, there's kind of no turning back, because if they do turn back, people will still be afraid that they'll change their mind again. And this is a problem with absolute power and centralized autocracy. It's unpredictable, just like Putin was. Foreign policy was unpredictable. So the other problem is Xi is boosting the state-owned enterprise, the SOEs, which Deng had dismantled, but he wants the Communist Party to be more in control of these state-owned enterprises. And the problem is that without competition in the private sector, you're going to lose your best minds. So it's interesting. She combines what in our ideologies over here, a left-wing suspicion of the rich, the entrepreneurs, like Bernie has, with a right-wing reluctance to hand out money to the idle poor. No welfareism for China. The Economist ends this week's edition by saying, well, here's something you might consider doing. Do stimulus through green infrastructure development. There's plenty of that, and Biden certainly loaded a lot of that in his IRA bill, green infrastructure. So much so that a lot of environmentalists are in this country are pretty upbeat. And the other thing that he could do is bump the pensions. But the Economist notes that the Chinese Communist Party is not particularly generous, and they are not going to do that, probably. So all this makes the current moment in the property market even more perilous, because you don't have a safety net functioning economy. So there's a property bubble. There's been a lot of speculation, especially in the last handful of years, where people were looking for a place to park their wealth. The other problem is the demographic one, that the generations that were looking for the first home and married families, there aren't so many of those anymore. So first home buyers have passed its peak. The other problem is there's a lot of speculative selling. So you sell a house you haven't built yet, and that smacks of a Ponzi scheme, right? And so a lot of this is coming due at the same time. And it's a big problem for the Chinese economy, because the property sector, the construction, everything else, it's 20% of the economy. And so here's the projection for the property sector contribution to the gross national product. And it's negative, and maybe it'll be negative for a while, although decreasingly negative. It is not a good situation at all. So what is the Lehman moment? It's when all of a sudden markets realize this is terrible, I'm getting out, and everybody sells at the same time, and that's what leads to crashes. There's a wonderful book on this, and it's actually the Minsky moment. Minsky was, I think he got the Nobel Prize for looking at human economic behavior. And the Minsky moment is when suddenly you realize markets are overvalued and you sell, whether it's property or Dutch tulips. So confidence, they have a lack of confidence in the economy, but that's just a surrogate for a lack of confidence in the government. And look at this; it's just totally plunged, and somebody has called it long COVID. Because of the way she handled long COVID. Now you saw the citizenry sees how he handled that with such a heavy hand that there's an immune response to trusting government. So that for us medical people, that's a handy metaphor. So you don't have a leader that can inspire confidence and it can restore confidence. And you've had that in previous crises. Famously, there was Deng Xiaoping. There was a crisis. And so he got out on the road. I think he was almost 90 and took his famous Southern tour, stopping in every city, jawboning and cajoling, and just kind of single-handedly pumped confidence back into the system. It's amazing how much we depend on confidence, and surely that's one thing that our country is lacking in. And then again in 1998, there was a huge financial crisis, and Xu Ranji said, "Don't worry, folks. The government's going to keep things growing at 8%. We'll send out those stimulus checks, just like our government, both Trump and Biden, did during COVID." So the genie's out of the bottle with Xi. Even if he said, okay, listen, I'm going to be more self-restrained, he doesn't have the credibility to change his mind. And I like this quote: "The party lacks the power to limit its own power." Yes, Bob.
This is just a comment back to the property crisis, real estate ownership in China, and your reference to the Minsky moment or Lehman moment. If you remember the movie The Big Short, actually it was a book, of course, it was Michael Burry who was the guy who shorted the mortgage market in 2007 and 8, I guess, and was able to close his fund out at enormous profit in 2008. He's just shorted the stock market here. It's claimed by CNN reporting that he shorted it by 1.4 billion, which is not an awful lot in terms of the total value of the stock market. But Michael Burry actually acted on the idea of the Lehman moment or the Minsky moment and made out like the proverbial bandit 15 years ago. So watch the stock market, I suppose. So the economists or financiers are barely right twice in a row.
Yeah. And I love I think he was played by Christian Bales in the movie, right?
Yes.
He was a very interesting guy. He's on the spectrum for sure. He was a neurologist, and he couldn't sleep, and so he spent his nights reading prospecti So if you've ever invested and you get your prospectus, boy, oh boy, you don't want to read it. But being so far on the spectrum, he sat down and read it with a pencil and notepad and said, "This doesn't make any sense, right?" And he meets some guy in the movie. I think it was an Asian fast talker who was trying to sell him some product. And he said, "Whatever that guy's selling, I want to short it." Yeah. Okay. There are some signs of life. The sales of cars has gone up since the government exempted electric vehicles from a sales tax. Chinese households are not so depressed that they would miss out on a bargain. And we have a lot of friends in our neighborhood that have certainly been motivated by the subsidy for electric vehicles, so we understand that. And they may do, and The Economist is suggesting it quite strongly, they may do what we should have done in the 2008 subprime crisis, namely to establish a fund to buy up
Would have been a good idea.
unsold properties and create affordable rental housing for the poor. That's what we should have done. And the Chinese Communist Party has the heft to be able to do that. I guess that's the upside of autocracies. They make the trains run on time. And so that would have a lot of positive effects and maybe stop the downward spiral so that the Economist doesn't do another cover story. But she doesn't show any sign of it. He still wants greatness over growth. That he wants to be able to say that on his watch, China became #1. He wants security over efficiency, and mainly he'd like to see America kicked out of his sphere of influence because it was traditionally China's sphere of influence, and it should be again. And he would sacrifice comfort for resilience. So we talked about that with the grain problem that they're having. He wants them to be self-sufficient in grain, no matter what the cost is, because it would give them greater resilience in, say, taking over Taiwan. So the big question is, will the Chinese accept the falling lifestyle? Will these young generations that are refusing to get married, that are unemployed, will they quietly submit to a lower living standard? We will see. The disaffected young people in Chinese history have always been a problem. I mean, you go back through thousands of years, there's always been millennial type movements, mostly religious based, but in the last century, they took to the streets at the end of World War I when Versailles didn't give them everything they wanted. They certainly took to the streets in our lifetime in the Cultural Revolution. We saw them in Tiananmen Square in '89, and briefly, when zero COVID was still in force and people were beginning to complain, there were protests. They were small, but they were effective. The government abandoned zero COVID, maybe prematurely, and certainly before they immunized everyone that they should have. So there's just some interesting side notes. They have entertainers too, and there's there's currently a hit song, and the mystery is who does it mock? Who's the donkey? Who's the chicken who is really a prostitute in this song? This guy is interesting. He's been around quite a while. It started off like country and western singers with blue collar workers and farmers. But then he was embarrassed nationally in a singing competition and criticized, and he got depressed, and he's making a comeback, and it's unclear what he's trying to get at. I'll give you a follow up. Got my eye on him if there's any thing interesting. But one possibility is that he's worked in an Austrian philosopher who his main point was language can distort reality, and he thinks that some people think that's his broader critique of the Communist Party, that they're distorting reality. This refers to the point I made earlier about the Communist Party's just not reporting the bad news anymore. So people have stopped watching television, if you will. They've stopped trusting the government because they're getting a lot of false. If they're not getting any news on the state-owned media, they're getting obviously Chicken Little optimism, and they're not paying any attention to it. Another article that I tapped for some of the previous points about the statistics. In the West, it's interesting. I spotted this. Fewer kids are studying Mandarin now. So this is having a cultural effect, and this rings true with me. On a high school reunion, I went back to my elementary school where I attended from the 3rd to the 8th grade, and I'll show you some slides of that. Falling enrollment in Mandarin. There's also falling enrollment in German and French too. But interestingly, an increase in Korean culture, K-pop, the Parasite, the movie, their music, Korean cultures having its moment. But this is my grade school. I went in and where I used to stand and review the traffic officers, there's now a sign that says Confucius Classroom. And so a center for inquiry. So I actually visited this classroom. My whole elementary school is a magnet school. And so you can see sometimes YouTube ads, even if I don't request it, they add subtitles. So they caught me saying something like this. So I thought I'd throw that in for a little levity. So on the international global front, China, yeah. Huh? Okay. 5 after. So you'll remember when we started talking about China, we were looking at the end of World War II, and we were looking at the Bretton Woods post World War II, the new world order that Roosevelt and Churchill and various other luminaries worked out for us. And that China, this is what China's kind of rebelling against. So what do they propose? Well, what they're proposing is a coalition, a less ideological coalition, a coalition of, well, Russia and China are two autocracies, so they're not going to have any kind of democratic reform. Brazil and India are democracies, and so is South Africa. But they just had a big meeting last month, and Putin didn't go. Do you know why Putin didn't go?
He might have gotten arrested.
There you go. Very good. It was held in South Africa, who belongs to the World Court, which has indicted Putin for his treatment of young kids. He's moved them from Ukraine and put them in Russian schools. Among the many things he's done, I think the indictment was a many-fold, but that's the one thing that stands out. China's option is, hey, let's get all these other people to join us, and even Mexico and Argentina have showed interest in joining this China-led a global organization that they hope would replace the World Bank and other institutions that the West started in post World War I. But the problem is that really, you think these aspiring countries want to go into an alliance with this guy, particularly after he shoots down airplanes on the outside of Moscow? And it turns out that in the BRIC countries, the public opinion, this focuses on China, not Russia, but unfavorability of this group of autocrats, unfavorability is going up. They stopped asking about Russia. I don't know why. And Russia is having problems with this sinking ruble, but this gets us into what's going on in Russia. I've got quite a few things to say about that, which I'll do next week. So I will stop sharing and entertain comments.
Oh no, Donnie, why did you?
You're on the camera. I'll go take you off.
I'm trying to get rid of this. Yeah, there you go. Okay, comments.
Well, hi, this is Homer, if you don't mind a comment. And it goes back to what you said very, very early on, which is that a big problem for China is its declining population. And I hear this about Italy, hear this about Japan, hear this about various Western European countries. But consider the human population has increased from about 2 billion when we were school children to about 9 billion now. And it's pretty clear that continued increase in our population is unsustainable. So when economists despair because the population is declining, there's no economic future for this country, with this society, we need to rethink all this, because we're going to have to adjust to declining population if our population is going to survive.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Here.
maybe Liz is brought all over though.
Aiko's talking about another Lisa Strata moment. Yeah, automation, of course, is gonna help with that. Artificial intelligence is gonna help with that.
Did we both
So
speak to that? No way.
we'll find out. All right.
I know it's late. I'll just make a quick comment on something I heard on the Daily Telegraph Ukraine Now podcast, which I know you, John, listen to occasionally.
Yeah.
And it was a discussion with the Telegraph's economics correspondent, who pointed out that imports into Russia in dollar terms have now reached back and are up to the same level they were before sanctions were imposed. But that exports from Germany, etc., to Russia are down about 60 or 70%, but imports from Kazakhstan, etc., are up 2,000%.
Yeah.
We know how that works.
Yeah.
Where is Bob at right
What does
now?
that mean?
I don't know what it means.
Yeah.
Ask Bob.
Ask.
Bob Ico wants to know where you are. Is that-
I'm in my backyard in very hot Alamo.
What's the water? Background?
So is that tree behind you real? She wants to know.
Yeah, it's a flowering. It's actually a flowering cherry tree, if that might mean anything.
Well, to a Japanese person, yes, it does. She'll be there for blossoms next year.
Well, where's the water though?
Is Elms in the Bay Area, right?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all. We'll see you next week. Have a happy Labor Day.
Thanks,
Thank you, John. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
I hate it when it drops down.
Hi, John.
Pretty visible.
Hi, Jim. You're still there.
I'm still trying to figure out how AI is going to solve the population problem, but you can explain.
Well, it's going to solve the people don't need to work problem. You don't need workers.
How are you going to feed the population?
With
Already outgrown the supply.
automation will feed the population. The question is, how are you going to distribute the products? And it'd have to be Denmark on speed.
No, I'm not sure I agree. Natural resources are depleted at such a rate as to be unsustainable, whether you have AI, robots, Denmark, and so forth. So anyway, it's
it's not going to solve that. That's for sure.
children will have to deal with it.